Yeah, that's right. I'm really excited about this series. Like SG was saying, we took a whole series with this whole last year, really. So since January, if you've been with us at all, if this is your very first time, welcome. We're pumped to have you. But if you've been with us at all, we took a whole 16 weeks and talked about the head. Like, how do you know God? And those are online. You can go back into those. If you want to go backwards, we also would love to just have one of us, we'd love to have coffee with you and talk to you about how you can know God. We're into that. The other thing that we started moving toward at the end of the spring and into this year was, how do you take the God that we serve, this idea of God, and then I start putting that in my heart, So it's okay, so if I know God, which I think most people in America kind of know of God. I think if you grew up in America, there's this idea of the church, and whether you went to church or you didn't go to church, you've engaged with someone at the church. You know what I'm saying? So there's this idea that I know of God, or at least I know, I have an opinion of God, should I say it that way? I have enough in my brain to know that there is a God, and then I've created a belief system based on how much I know about him, right? And so for some people, it's well, I just don't believe he exists, because you don't ever study him. You just took your word for it at 13, and now you're 25, and you're still believing what your 13-year-old version of yourself thinks. And you don't do anything that you did when you were 13 at 25, but for some reason that one stuck, and I would really encourage you to try again, Or you didn't really push that into okay, well, if I know God and I want to study God and I start exploring God, this is actually probably the crux of where some people, maybe it's you, maybe it's friends of yours, maybe it's family, stopped going to church because what I know about God does not look like what you tell me you believe about God. And when I look at your life, that's not matching up. So why would I want anything to do with that? You know what I'm saying? So I'm not attacking you. If that's where you're at, that's actually, I would say, a pretty logical argument. Okay, if you believe in God and you tell me you believe in God, and I look at the life that you're living and that doesn't line up with any way, shape, or form, you're really rude to people, not a really good friend, you don't really care about, that stuff makes me not want to believe what you believe. And if I think you know more about God than I do, then whatever God you're serving, I'm not in. I'm actually kind of out, because I don't want anything to do with that. And that's what we're talking about this fall, is if you know God, and you say you believe God, how do we move it from the brain to the heart? And if we can move it from the brain to the heart, where you start living your life as if you know God, look, I'm not going to try to convince you or convict you of anything. What I am going to do my very best to do is be as clear as I possibly can about God and his son Jesus, and how the gospel engages with your life. And then we're going to trust, this is what we do at Mazi, we trust that the Holy Spirit's going to do their job, and the Holy Spirit going to come in and convict you of some things. And things that you're doing now that you don't lose sleep over, you might wake up tomorrow and be why do I feel this way? I got that, I don't feel like I should be doing that anymore. We would call that conviction, and we would call that a praise. That's cool. And we want to walk with you through that, because everybody has a different place that they're starting from. Everybody's got a different thing that they're engaged with. And today what we're going to look at is how then, when my neighbor is in need of being loved, can I transfer the way that I love God to the way that I love my neighbor? How can I love people the way that I say I believe I should? Fair? That's a really good intro. I practiced that so many times and it never came out like that, Mike. So we're going to be in a couple scriptures through this series. The first one will be in Matthew 23. And if you have your Bible or whatever, you get your phone out, whatever you want to do, Matthew 23, but you want to keep Matthew 7 on your mind, because we're going to shoot back to Matthew 7 and then come back next week, because I'm really excited to go after it. But there are two big questions that we're chasing after. The two big questions that we're really chasing after in this series will lead to the biggest question after the two questions. Okay? You got me? You with me? Because Lil, you didn't write that down. All right? Okay, no, I'm just kidding. You're wow, how's it go? This is also a lot more fun, because I get to be a lot less story intensive, and I get to be a lot more interactive, which is actually my native land when I'm speaking. So prepare your hearts for that. If you've never heard me speak, you are not prepared. Okay. The first question is this, do I love God? And this is just, you can write this down or you can process it up. Do I love God? Do I love God? Put emphasis on all of them. Do I love God? And the second question is, do I love my neighbor? Do I love the people? Because we're going to read a little bit about, do you love God? Do you love your neighbor? Because all of the prophet, like all of it hangs on those two questions. And then the third question, which is like the pivot point or the most important point is, okay, then how? Okay, Brandon, it's cool. Okay, I love God, but how? I love my neighbor, but how? Let's get applicable. Let's get really practical on what do I do if I tell you that I love you? What do I do if I believe in this? So we're going to read, and I want to build some tension. I was actually driving. This is the best part about this morning, because I was driving my son to school, and we live in Bay City, so we're going through, and the bridge was up, and the bridge was pulled all the way back, dude. It was holed up all the way back, but I went on the farthest left lane, okay, and it was open. And I thought, I'm just going to ride this out, see what happens. All right? Some of you are already judging me. Like, I can see it in some of you're like, oh, you're that guy. Not typically, but today my son was really late to school. And I thought, I've got some caffeine in my cup. Let's go have some fun. So we start down the left side. And I'm like, okay, this is going to be great. Okay? It's going to be awesome. I'm going to just go a little bit, 1 block, 2 blocks, 3 blocks. I tell you, I'm getting all the way down there. I'm like, boy, this is going to open up real nicely. You ever see a play like that? You see it in your head, and then it happens. You're like, oh, this is going to be real smooth. I imagine this is how football players feel when they see they're running the ball and they see it just split wide open. They sprint through. Like I imagine it's like touchdown territory. Like we're going to this is like an 89-yard run. You know what I'm saying? Where was I going? Okay, now I got it. So there's this person. I won't actually say the name of the license plate because they commute. We commute at the same time toward the same area. I don't know where they go, but I know that they're always there. Well, this woman was 2 cars in front of me, and she had her blinker on forever. And then we're making the play of our lives, and it's like she just stops. And like we all know that if there's a bus right there, you can beat that thing, like you can do this. She just stopped. She's like, I got to get over. And she didn't say that to me, but I just assumed by the way that she stopped in the middle of the drive. And the car behind her was kind of feeling it out and was like kind of doing the same thing. Now this had happened. Bridge is still up. We've got an opening, but we're not moving anywhere. I'm like, you know what? Let's be patient. I've gained a lot of ground on the left. Like I'm good. Well, the woman behind her, we'll call her Karen. Karen puts her blinker on and gets over in front of a truck. And then the car in front of her, the bridge goes down and traffic starts moving. And I'm thinking, I almost said the name. I'm thinking that we'll call her Susan. I'm thinking Susan is finally going to get over because her blinker has been on literally forever. And Karen was right behind her. So surely Karen would not do what I think she's about to do. And wouldn't you know it, Karen sped up and didn't let Susan in. Can you believe that? Yeah. How many of you have done that today? When you're coming up here on US 10 and it starts getting real skinny, how many of you sped up, to make sure nobody got in front of you? But isn't that crazy? And here's the thing. I wrote down a couple of things to try to build tension, because we've all done this, right? And some of you are like, I've never. Yeah, right. Okay. You've been in a hurry and you thought that one extra car length was the ticket. You know what I'm saying, Mason? And you're like, you might be the nicest guy I've ever met. You've still done this. You know what I'm saying? Like you're very, very caring of other people. You still be like, no, you can get behind me, Sorry, dude, I didn't mean to call you out like that, but I totally did. The question that I have with this, and I'm sitting in the car, and I'm like, I'm Team Susan in this scenario. I'm like, hold on, Care, what are you doing? Get back, let that poor woman get to the right and turn her blinker off, okay? Blinkers are expensive. They're like $4, all right? This one, I'm mad for her. I don't think she cared at all, but I'm mad for her. And I'm like, you know what, Riker? That right there is what's wrong with America. That whole thing. And this whole thing's going on. And then eventually, they get over, and I'm like, ooh, I see an opening. So I shoot up, and I get in front of the bus anyway, so I was fine. But the question I have is why? Why would that person do that? Why do we do that? You know what I'm saying? And I know you got some of you going ahead. Stop it. Just stay right here. Why is it that when you're driving, there are moments where your Christianity kind of just goes out the window a little bit? What is it about you and what is it about me that when we're engaged with something like that, and I know this is really silly because it's, it's traffic and all that. Why is it that we have a tendency to sit back and try to put ourselves in a better position than the people around us? Why do we do that? And I can only come up with one answer. There's probably 100. You probably have better answers than me. When I was thinking about this, it is inconvenient to go out of my own way. Because I have an idea in my head which makes sense when you think of things like water. That the path of least resistance is kind of how I want to go. And I want to just be with the flow, I don't want to do things that actually deviate me from going where I want to go. I certainly don't want God to do anything to deviate me from going where I want to go. But I really, really don't want any of you driving to deviate me from where I'm going to go. And it's inconvenient for me, for you to get one car length ahead of me. I don't know how fast you're going to go through this. I don't know if, you know what I'm saying? And you start getting in this world. And the reason it's inconvenient is because it costs me something. It costs me something. It may not cost me like that much, but there's something in me that feels like when you get there before I get there, I'm missing out. You know what I'm saying? And all of this puts us in a position where we got to start thinking about, I wonder if Jesus has ever talked about that. I wonder if Jesus ever communicated about something where I should keep my eyes up and around. And he talks about the fact that this inconvenience is a struggle of mine. As a matter of fact, in Matthew 22, which we'll be in. Matthew 22, did I say 23 earlier? I apologize about that. Matthew 22, we're going to start reading in verse 34. 34. Matthew 22, 34. This is what Jesus says. This is what Scripture says, and Jesus, he's in red, so we know which one he is. Hearing that Jesus had silenced the Sadducees, and maybe that's why they were sad, you see. You can't write that stuff. That's good stuff right there. I can't believe it took that long. The Pharisees got together. Now, the Sadducees actually didn't believe that the Messiah was actually coming. That's why it's a joke, but it's actually why they were sad, you see. The Pharisees, however, were there. Their whole job was to point out the Messiah to the Jewish people. So their whole job was to see Jesus and be like, that's the guy. They did such a good job, they put him on a cross. So it's a weird system, but I don't know. We'll talk about that another time. One of them, an expert in the law. Now, this is important for them because there's different titles and different jobs that they all held. Expert in the law tested Jesus with this question: Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law? Now, stop. The greatest commandment in the law. Sum up all of Leviticus, Deuteronomy, throw all of that Exodus in there, and all of the laws that we've come up with since. So there's this thing that the Pharisees would do. The Pharisees, and this is part of the legalism of when something's a sin, we set up boundaries around it. Have y'all ever noticed this? Where do guardrails sit on a mountain? What's that? At the edge, but a little bit away, right? It's not right at the edge. The goal is that if you hit the guardrail, you won't go actually all the way down the mountain. The goal is that it would keep you in bounds, right? That's the goal. You don't want to hit the guardrail, but they set that guardrail up in a position so much so that if or when you hit it, that thing will push you back around. You don't actually get to the actual part that you're being protected from. And so what we've done, and what the Pharisees really did, was they would begin to set fences around. Think of the Hollywood sign. There's a fence around the Hollywood sign. We don't want you to touch the Hollywood sign, so we put a fence 15 feet back. And the problem with that is that, and that this is really what Jesus came to fight against, is that the Pharisees had created laws about the fencing, not about the sign. Okay? So the new way they were creating laws for the people who followed God, and the laws had nothing to do with the original intent of why it was there. It became a false law, like Jesus talks about often in Scripture. You should read it if you haven't read it. The New Testament's really great. But Jesus comes back, he starts fighting against that. He's like, you guys are teaching the wrong thing. You're teaching about the fence line, but I'm trying to teach them about that. And so we're going to talk about that. And they're like, yeah, but what about this? He's like, this is, I don't know, what about this? Like, where'd you get the fence? You know, all that. So Jesus, would you please tell me the greatest commandment in the law? The ones that we made up and the ones that we got from our ancestors. And Jesus replied, love the Lord your God with all your... Sorry, we haven't practiced that. Love the Lord your God with all your... Nice try. I like where you were going, Skylar. You're like, we're going to hit hard. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all of your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. Number one, your main job on this earth. Number one, love God with your whole heart, with your whole soul, and with your whole mind. Number one. Second one is like this. Love your neighbor like you love yourself. All of the law and prophets hang on these two commandments. You do these two, you'll probably get all the rest of them right. You want to know why? Because when I love God and I love my neighbor, I don't want to stab you. When I love God and I love my neighbor, there's no need for me to lie to you. As a matter of fact, when I love God and I love my neighbor, I actually didn't mean to hurt you. And if all of them lie on these two things, then it makes sense that we as a church have spent a lot of time processing how do you love the Lord with God with all your heart, soul, and mind. And it makes sense that we're processing a lot of time. How do you love your neighbor? How do you do that? Because if you do these two, the rest of them are kind of obvious. If you do these two, the rest of them are kind of easy. Now shoot over to Matthew 7. Matthew 7:7. And these are going to be the two scriptures with that context. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, with all your mind, with all the things, with all your feet, you know. Now we're going to be at Matthew 7:7. Now this is Jesus speaking. Jesus is speaking in different contexts. This is obviously before the teacher tries to hit him in the law. Pay attention to this. Some of us are like, well, how do I love God with all my heart, my soul? Like, how do I do this with all my mind? Listen, ask, and it will be given to you. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and the door will be open to you. For everyone who asks receives. He who seeks will find, and the one who knocks, the door will be open. Which of you, if his son asks for bread, not many of you are fathers, but I would not, will give him a stone? Or if he asks for a fish, will give him a snake? If you then, though you are evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father in heaven give good gifts to those who ask him? So in everything, do to others what you would have them do to you, for this sums up the law and the prophets. These two scriptures this one sums it up. It's the golden rule, right? Some of you heard a different golden rule. If you can't say something nice, don't say anything at all. It's not the golden rule. Jesus gave us the golden rule. That's like the silver rule, maybe the bronze rule, okay? The golden rule is in everything you do to others as you would have them do to you. So that basically, if you take care of people, then they should have no reason to try to hurt you, right? If you take care of people, if you love them, if you do what you would have them do to you. Now, the thing that frustrates us the most in this world is that we don't get to choose what they do to us. You can only choose what you get to do to them. You know what I'm saying? You can walk up and be like, wow, beige, it's so beautiful. Slap, you know? You did your job. You're just trying to give a compliment. They slapped you in the face. They thought you were being mean, like they thought you were being rude. You know what I'm saying? You can't control what they do to you. You can only control what you do to them. And why are we talking about this? Because we're chatting through this process. We're chatting through this series. And this is like the opener of the series. We got 2 more to go. And then we got a great one at the end of after the worship night. But we're talking about this because it's a very, very simple concept. If you want to learn how to love your neighbor, you have to learn how I can love God. And if I want to learn how to love God, I have to start to seek him. So this is a thing that's crazy to me. This is where I start going on tangents. So if I'm too far off, just pull me back. The thing that's crazy to me in the life that we're living is that we believe that there's a God out there who is sovereign, which means in control of everything. But we only access or talk to or pray to that God when things are going wrong. We believe there's a God out there who loves you, who wants to give you bread, not a stone, wants to give you fish, not a snake. We believe that. But we don't act like that. And we certainly don't live like that. And I just got into I had 4 conversations this week alone where the circumstances surrounding the individuals were starting to mess with the belief in God. It was like things weren't going perfectly. So it was starting to doubt, am I even supposed to be doing what I'm doing? Y'all ever feel like that? Y'all ever been in that moment? It's like, it's not lining up the way I had it in my head. Am I not supposed to? We have this idea like God's will is like a target and you got to hit the center. Y'all know? But what if God's will is just that you would love God and that you would love your neighbor? There's like no job description in there. There's no like title. There's no salary. There's no world in here where what you do is how you love people. Okay? And sometimes we get that backwards. We like start thinking, okay, well, if I'm going to do this and how I'm going to do this is because I'm going to leverage what I do to show people how much I love them. Well, guess what? You're going to get frustrated because there's going to be a day where things aren't going to go according to the plan you have in your head. And the only thing you can do is sit back and you can show that my job is to love the Lord my God with all my heart, soul, and mind. And how do I do that? I got to seek him. I got to spend time with him. I had a buddy of mine who came to me and said, look, man, what do you like? How do I get to know God? And I said, well, do you have kids? What would you say to one of your kids who had that same question? Like, if one of your kids, what's the one thing you just want to do with your kid? Like, what's the one thing? You guys have graduated kids, so I'm literally asking. What is the one thing that you would just love to do with your kid? Just spend time with them. More than anything, the one thing I want to do is literally sit at a table somewhere and just hear how you're doing. I've got no other plans. Like, I've got kids. Like, I would just love to sit and listen to my kids and hear about how their day went. I just want to know. I've got no other plans. And we're over here like, oh, I got to do this to please God. I got to do this to please God. I got to make sure I do this to please God. I got this like checklist, bro. And it's like, what are you doing? None of that's in here. The one thing God is asking you to do is to love him. And you know what? You spend time with people you love. But for some reason, God gets the back burner. We told him, sit on the bench. And then if we're losing, we say, get in here. What have you done? Why are we losing? He's like, I was on the bench. I was right. I was where you put me. Like, what are you talking about? Why are you losing? You're losing because you didn't let me play. So you want to spin? Put Booby in. You know what I'm saying? Booby Mouse. Anybody? We have one option here, and that's you can go spend time. It's like, well, how do I do that? I don't know. Go on a walk. Pray. If you journal. If you read. There are 9 spiritual pathways. If you worship, worship. If you feel close to God when you're being active with helping people, because giving a voice to people who don't have a voice for themselves, get involved. The point here is simple. If you spent time seeking God, you will find God. The problem isn't that God is unfindable. The problem is that we don't like playing hide and seek. It's like the most lame game ever. Like, God, where are you? He's like, I'm right here. Oh, that's not how you hide, but I appreciate that. You know what I'm saying? It's a different style of the game. We have this idea like God is out there somewhere on Mount Everest to be found. And the reality is God is just waiting for you to turn around. Ask, you'll seek. Seek, you'll find. Knock, the door will be open. And the problem is sometimes too, we get into that prosperity world where we're like, oh man, if I pray for it, God's going to do it. No, because some of your prayers are stupid. And some of your prayers are incredibly self-serving. They don't help anybody but yourself. Some of you do not deserve $2 million. You want to know why? Because you're already selfish with 10. Why would I give you 2 million? You can't even handle 10. Some of you do not deserve what you're asking for in your prayers because you are so about you that blessing is going to go to you and nowhere else. And some of you, like we've talked about with Joseph, we talked a lot about Joseph. Some of you have been asking God, and God has you on a pathway toward what you've been asking for, but it's better than what you thought. It's different than what you thought, and it involves different people than you thought. And the problem is we get all fired up on the circumstances again. We get fired up on these things like we know what we're doing. And the push is simply this. But what if you loved God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind? You asked him, you sought him, and he knocked. And then the second question, and I'm not going to spend too much time on this because I'm going to work on this next week, is how do I love my neighbor? Like, how do I actually tangibly love my neighbor? And so, given the fact that this morning I had this scenario, I want to challenge you this week to do one thing this week as often as it comes up, and that's let the car in ahead of you. And every time you do that, I want you to pray for the person in the car. Simple. Don't make it complicated. And every time you don't do that, be like, I had a moment. Lord, that's on me. That's on me. We're in the challenge moment. But every time you don't do that, I want you to ask this question. I hope this question comes in, man, how do I love my neighbor? I got 2 more things and I'm done. The reality is simply this. Loving your neighbor costs you something. How you love your neighbor, how do I love my neighbor? It'll always cost you something. Might cost you time, might cost you that text message. You got to send it, Like there's real practical ways to love your neighbor. We're going to talk about that later in the series. We got the Good Samaritan story is going to be great. I know it's going to be awesome. But how you do it application-wise is there's so many different ways that you can love your neighbor. The point is that we got to get our eyes up. So many times we have our heads down in the book, or you're like, oh man, I'm just grinding, just got my head down, got my eyes down. You got to get your eyes up. Start looking around you. There are a lot of ways to help people in this earth. There's just a ton of them. And we don't need to be the church that all 40 of us got to go. You're there, go. This is my favorite thing. People will be like, oh, Brent, will you, I got this friend who's really struggling with something. Would you pastor them? Like, why? Like, Brent, that's really insensitive. But God sent you in their life on purpose. Why don't you step in and I'll pastor you on how to pastor them? Why do I got to go? I don't know that person. We're going to spend 15 minutes in awkward silence. They're going to look at me and not say anything. It's going to be all shallow because I don't know. But you can say one word and it will be more impactful and have more depth than anything. You see what I'm saying? It's like we've created these systems where I don't have to be involved in the neighbor's lives and what I'm doing. And yet, when we love people, we step toward people. Bless you. When you love people, you jump toward people. You go toward them. So the question is not, will this be convenient for me? Because if I'm going to love my neighbor, I'll hit you with the real. No, it's not convenient. It's going to cost you something. Usually time, maybe $6 for a coffee. Maybe you are hearing the same story for the 15th time because your friend just can't get over it. I don't know. My whole point is simply this. It's not the issue that it costs something. It's that we need to be willing to pay it. Because there was a God who loved you so much, he sent his son. Bless you. It's a pandemic over there. Oh, sorry. It's going to be on YouTube. It's not real. It's just sneezes. CDC calls me. He's like, I'm not doing this with you guys. I don't know where I am. Thank you. We're talking about the fact that it's going to cost you something, and usually it costs you time. Sometimes it costs you a little bit of money. But the whole point here is that if I love God and I want to love my neighbor, there's a reality where I have to be willing to sacrifice something of mine for my neighbor, because God sacrificed his son for you and for me. It would be really weird for us to process that loving God and loving our neighbor, that there's no carryover of how that's supposed to look. The interesting thing, too, is that when God sacrificed his son for you and I to have a relationship with him, sometimes you can mend relationships by loving your neighbor. Sometimes you can just mend relationships by loving God. Saying, God, I don't even know what I'm doing here. Like, there have been things I've done and sat in. Like, there was a school shooting in Colorado. I was the youth pastor, and my kids were all in. One of our kids got shot. She ended up dying. People are like, what are you going to do, Brent? Cry? I don't know. But the thing that you all don't get to know is that when you're a pastor, you don't just get the privilege of pastoring the victims. You get the burden of pastoring the aggressors. Nobody talks about that part. I don't get to just call CDC and let it be. I have to pastor two sides of the equation, plus the third, which is the people around it, who don't understand any of the details but have an opinion. Oh my goodness, don't they? So you got to pastor three ways when you go through stuff like that. And then people are like, oh, Brent, no, it's the gospel. If you're going to love people, you have to love them all. If you're going to love them all, you have to do it. And it's going to sacrifice. You got to sacrifice something. Usually time. Sometimes it's tears. Sometimes it's money. Sometimes it's, I don't even know, a spot in the line. You're going to be late by 32 seconds, which you should have gotten in your car earlier, I can't wait for the rest of this series. I'm going to stop there because I got more to say, but I'm just going to let it go. As we continue to go down this series, we're going to open up more and more of these layers. And the whole point here is not to make you feel guilty about the fact that you cut people off. The point here is to make you aware of our only job on this earth, if we love God, is to step in and love people around us. If we love people around us, what does that look like? It looks like us picking up our heads and starting to apply some of the things we've read or some of the things we've heard our whole lives. So I'm not going to pretend like all of you've read it, and that's okay. But if you kind of have this thing in you where you know, and if you kind of know, let's try to live that out. And that's what we're going after in this series. I hope you come back next week. If you're not here, happy Halloween. I am a Halloween fan. And the reason I say that is because when people are out there doing their thing and everybody's like, oh, it's devil worship and all that, why wouldn't I want to be a light in a dark area? If you've got, get the hot dog, get the grills out, put some hot dogs on that thing for some parents who are out there starving, trying to eat all that candy and need something else. You know what I'm saying? Like, do that. Put the cider in the cup and just say, hey, we're here for you. We don't have to be afraid of things, because when you give things like that, when you give it too much power, you eliminate some of the power of what God has in the earth. And I'm not here trying to do anything but tell people about Jesus.